So Ballotpedia has been around since 2007, and our mission is to get neutral and accurate information to every consumer, free of cost, about politics, American politics at every level of government. We also, so besides elections, we also cover a certain amount of policy and process, um, and we cover everything from federal elections down to statewide elections, down to school board elections, city elections, and of course, the project that I'm most familiar with and most involved with is ballot measures, and that's kind of our flagship project, covering any proposition that voters are directly deciding instead of sending representatives to decide it for them. So we started with articles about all statewide ballot measures and cover a selection of local ballot measures as well.
That's wonderful. I myself am a proponent for our school choice initiative here in California. So I'm actually excited to see what information gets put up there. And I know I was involved with Proposition 16 here in California, which was a statewide measure for affirmative action, which failed. And I was on the side to push no. And I noticed you guys had a lot of in-depth information, including, what proponents from either side were saying. This is a lot of work. I noticed you had mentioned that you go all the way down to city council races, which I've used your website as a resource for that. That is just how many races are there total, especially in God, don't even go to a presidential year, but a midterm year this year. We're looking at probably thousands of races, right?
Right, and we're always trying to expand. So unfortunately, our scope right now goes to the top 100 largest cities, and then just this year we're trying to increase to the top 200 largest cities, and that includes school districts that are within those cities as well as county-wide races. But of course, that leaves a lot of the country uncovered. So you're right. There are tens of thousands of elections every year. So trying to cover all those is an aspiration of ours. We are constantly building to having that comprehensive election coverage that we sort of dream about. And we're doing that. Our current approach is to do that sort of by trying to reach the largest audience as possible. So that's moving from higher population areas down to lower population areas. But one of the most satisfying things we do is to cover those small races, those small city council, those small school district races, just because there's so little information available at those levels of government. And one project I really love is actually our recall project, because since there are few enough recalls, we try to cover recalls comprehensively. So we are covering recalls for cities that have a few hundred or a few thousand residents, or we're covering school districts that only have 200 students that are having recalls of their school board members. And that's some of the most satisfying work we do, I think, is because of the information gap is bigger down there at those small races.
Yeah, definitely the need is there, especially these more obscure races. Like here in California, we have like judges, and I'm always like, when I'm filling in the ballot, I'm like, I need some information on these people. So hopefully, you guys will keep growing, increasing your scope, and good to know the parameters currently. So who founded Ballotpedia, and what's kind of the history? You said 07 was when you guys started. I checked the website and I noticed there's a huge team, obviously, to cover the sheer amount of information that needs to be covered. But how did that team come about, and what's kind of the history in the last 15 years that you guys have been in existence?
Sure, yeah. So our current president and CEO, Leslie Graves, started the company in 2007. And it was actually called the Lucy Burns Institute originally, kind of in honor of the suffragette. So that's how it started. We had several products to start. We had two websites at some point early in the company's history: Ballotpedia, which does what Ballotpedia does now, and then Judgepedia, because the two big gaps that Leslie saw were like you just pointed to, information about judges, but also information about ballot measures. So those were kind of the two things that led her to think there would be an appetite for this type of information. There was a big gap. So we started out really with ballot measures and judges, and expanded to state legislatures and federal races, kind of organically. The company really grew from something quite small where Leslie was just editing the website and even having volunteers edit, and had a few staff members to where it is now with quite an operationalized team that covers everything with a strict set of guidelines and criteria and neutrality documentation and all kinds of measures in place to guarantee that the content is accurate and neutral. So yeah, it really in the last 15 years has grown quite organically to what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The state legislatures, a lot of people don't realize how important those races are, but, we've seen a lot of tectonic shifts in terms of, like, say, West Texas, where, those seats and those special election races give us tea leaves to what is going on nationally. And I think gives us a little bit of an insight into what will happen in the midterms this year. But so you guys didn't start out doing the state races, is what I'm hearing, and you guys now cover that comprehensively, I'm understanding, right?
Yeah, we expanded to that quite quickly, though. Covering state leg and state executive offices was sort of the next big expansion after just covering ballot measures. So yeah, we covered it quite quickly. It's funny, we didn't. The model for Ballotpedia has been to go where the information is needed the most, and we saw that gap at the statewide level quite early. Because, like you said, I think the sheer amount of policy that's set by state legislators and the state executives is sometimes kind of overlooked with the general media coverage in the country. All eyes are kind of at the federal level. So some of our most robust coverage is at the statewide level, and then we expanded into covering federal races more comprehensively and with more depth even after we really dived into the state stuff. So we've been, state level races we've been covering for years now. It's kind of old hat for us, but at first that information gap was something we were looking at from the beginning, but like I said, it kind of started out with ballot measures.
That's great. So I noticed, when I looked you up online and everything, your focus on ballot measures, and you had mentioned that earlier. What brought you to cover that specifically, and what kind of ballot measures do you see being hot measures to look out for this cycle and this year?
Yeah, so I've been with Ballotpedia since late 2012, and I was brought on to research two things: to look at local ballot measure coverage, which it just has a huge information gap, but also to look at the processes and the laws that govern ballot measures, and try and build the understanding of how some states don't even have processes for citizens to sign petitions and put measures on the ballot, while others do. It's roughly split 50-50 for those states. And even at the local level, the amount of variety when it comes to before your ballot gets sent to you or before you go in and vote, what determines which propositions you see on that ballot. That's so when I came in, that continues to be sort of one of my main interests at Ballotpedia, is tracking all the different changes to these laws governing direct democracy. But yeah, as far as what's coming up, so 2022 is going to be, I feel like there are some states that are kind of playing catch up from 2020. 2020 we had slightly fewer ballot measures than we're used to. And a lot of that was because everyone was pretty focused on the pandemic, and there were a lot of signature gathering efforts that couldn't really get off the ground in 2020. So they shifted their attention to this year. And then even state legislators just had a lot on their minds and didn't get around to some of the voter facing issues that they often do in an even numbered year. So 2022 I expect to be quite exciting. Some of the things we're looking at, abortion is an issue that's going to be on the ballot in several states. Right now, it's mostly going to be on the ballot in conservative states, concerning sort of adding an interpretation to state constitutions, saying that those constitutions do not contain a right to abortion or funding of abortions. That's one issue that seems to be trending a little bit. And at the statewide level, 2 or 3 measures sort of makes a trend for us that we pay attention to. Tax policy is always something that voters address every year at the ballot box a lot. So some interesting ones to look for are income taxes, specifically on high income levels. So sometimes they're called millionaires taxes, although the one in Arizona is said that the level is not $1 million, it's less than that. But specifically that kind of tax for education. And conversely, some income tax policies trying to drop the number of income tax brackets and make taxes flatter, sort of from the more conservative side. So interesting tax policies there. Sports.
And which
betting.
states are doing that? Which states are flattening those tax brackets or
So-
proposing to?
Yeah, so Arizona, the Arizona legislature passed and the governor signed a bill to flatten the rate. It reduces it from I think four or five brackets down to 2 brackets, and then if revenue is high enough, it actually makes it a flat tax in Arizona and reduces.
Oh wow!
But then so the reason it's on the ballot for voters is the groups, including like education and advocates and some teacher unions didn't like that. So they collected signatures to challenge that to that bill. It's a process called a veto referendum or a people's veto. So they collected signatures to try and let voters decide to repeal that law that the legislature just passed. So that's on the ballot in Arizona, and then Massachusetts kind of has the other direction. Massachusetts has a millionaire's tax for education on the ballot this year.
Oh wow! So when you cover that in Ballotpedia, how in depth do you go? I'm assuming you always, give the yes side and no side some information where maybe key quotes from proponents. What do you guys? What's the minimum that you do for these initiatives as far as information goes? And what I love about what you guys do is it's not overwhelming. The way you guys have it set up is very easy for the eye and easy for me as a consumer of the information to digest it in a pretty a la carte fashion. Like I might not read all of it, but I will read a certain section because it's relevant to what I'm trying to learn about or look for.
Right. Yeah, we have a pretty set recipe for these ballot measures, and luckily, even though they're all so unique and the political circumstances are so unique, it does sort of fit into some key topics. So important for us is to give a really neutral summary of just what the measure would do. What's the effect of a yes vote and the effect of a no vote? So that's kind of our top priority. That's at the top of the page. We also want to get readers familiar with what they're going to see on the ballot. So we have a section devoted to the text of the measure, including the ballot language, but also the full legal text. So if a reader, doesn't want to trust our analysis or doesn't want to trust supporters and opponents and really want to just look at the legal text, the nitty gritty of the legal text, we always include that on our pages. But then really it comes down to a whole bunch of perspectives. So we have a section dedicated to the support perspective, where we list key endorsements, arguments for the measure, and any sort of analyses or white papers that come out by the supporter opposition side will be listed in those sections. And then we have like the equivalent section for opposition, where we really try and highlight the strongest arguments on both sides, the most recognizable and most important endorsements on both sides. And then one of my favorite sections is our campaign finance information. We curate all of that ourselves. We go straight to the state reporting websites and download that data and then try and present it in a very easy to digest fashion with support and opposition totals, and then top donors who's actually giving the most money to back these or to oppose them.
Got it.
And then we have a good background section too, because sometimes the political context that goes into these completely changes the landscape of a given measure. Maybe there's a measure that's trying to repeal a policy that's been in place for 30 years, so there's a lot of information available, or maybe it's a completely new idea, and so that kind of background context, or how many other states have the same policy, what are those policies like, being able to compare state to state in our background section, I think is a really good tool for a reader, because they might have no idea, what types of states or what types of changes a given policy might make, unless they see like, oh, well, Colorado and California already do this. Well, let's see, do we like how that policy's worked out in those states? So our background sections, I think, are very useful as well.
Very interesting. And so to qualify that where do you get, kind of the green light to put up an initiative? Is it after, like in certain states like California, we have to get a certain number of signatures on the petition before it becomes an official ballot measure on the ballot in November? How do you guys get your information from, say, the Attorney General, or how do you decide which ballot measures are given the Ballotpedia treatment, basically?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of key benchmarks in sort of the life cycle of a ballot measure, and of course there are many different types of ballot measures. But the key two differences, I would say, is where are those ballot measures coming from? Are they coming from the legislature, or are they coming from a signature petition? And of course that's simplified, but that's kind of one of the first things we look at. And there are even other origins. There are commissions like in Florida, but those are the two main categories. So for citizen initiatives, we actually try to put up articles about almost every initiative that's filed with state officials. And of course that varies by state. Sometimes you file those with the Secretary of State, sometimes you file them with the Lieutenant Governor, sometimes you file them with the Attorney General. But as soon as they're filed and there's a public record and we can actually look at the legal text and say, okay, this is what this measure would do if it's approved, we try to get a very basic article up. In some states that's impossible. We have to actually wait till a certain type of review is done by the state, because honestly, sometimes people file initiatives by accident. Like you get initiatives that are filed and it's just like a letter to an editor or something. It's like it's such a complicated process that sometimes we have to weed out the nonsensical ones before we actually write articles. But those first articles are what we call like sprouts, or just the basic information you need. Who's sponsoring it? What is the process that they have to go through? What's their requirement? And then a link to the text and a very brief summary. And then our coverage actually builds over time. So the more traction a measure gets, and the more likely that measure is to be on the ballot and actually affect voters and make voters have to make a decision about it, the more time we put into it, and the more detailed information we have to put on the website.
Yeah, and I've seen you guys flex on that and seen those updates, so that's great. Do you have a team, or is it just you that kind of? And I'm sure with how many ballot measures are there around the country, I don't think one person can handle all that, right?
Yeah, it's more than a one-man job. I've got an awesome team. I've got three full-time writers, and then we also use some interns for some of the research. So three full-time writers and myself cover the entire country, and and that's we have the same coverage scope as for the elections team. So we cover all statewide ballot measures. There aren't any federal level ballot measures. So we cover all statewide ballot measures. And at the local level, we cover everything down to the top 100 largest cities, including school districts, county-wide stuff, anything that overlaps, anything that a voter in one of the top 100 largest cities will see. We cover that. And of course, we're always to expand.
And how about school districts?
Yeah, so that includes a lot of school districts. So
that does.
A lot of the local ballot measures we cover are for our school district funding measures. So like a bond issue that voters have to approve, or a tax measure. And like I said, so those school districts would be the districts that overlap with the top 100 largest.
That overlap with the top 100, not the top 100 school districts. Good to know.
Oh yeah. Okay. But we also actually, this is not part of our. We actually, one of our oldest projects is covering local ballot measures in California, and we do that comprehensively just because of sort of how complicated the landscape is. So there's a need, but also just we have a good readership built up there. So that's kind of like a special expansion of our coverage. Is we go ahead and just cover all local ballot measures in California.
Oh, that is good to know. Yeah, that's why it's so comprehensive.
Yeah.
Whenever I search anything locally, it's there. So good job, guys. Now, overall, what kind of issues do you think are going to be the hottest issues? I know we had talked about school choice stuff, as well as tax issues. What else have you been seeing that's going to be hot for the midterms this year?
Yeah, there will likely be some measures about
abortion too.
Abortion, sports betting is another one that's kind of trending right now. In the last several years, sports betting has become states have become able to legalize it because of a federal court ruling. So now different states are deciding their policy, and some of them are doing that through initiatives. And that gambling is something that's always been addressed at the ballot box pretty frequently. So we'll see some gambling measures. One of course, the landscape is still forming. So we're expecting anywhere between 170 and 200 statewide ballot measures for 2022.
Wow.
And there's only 64 are set right now. 64 are finalized. So, there's a good 2/3 of the measures we'll be watching are still coming down the pipeline. But as far as early trends go, one that I find very interesting, although it's kind of nerdy, are ballot measures about ballot measures. So there's been this resurgence in the usage of ballot measures, especially citizen-initiated measures, since 2016. And so state legislators have really sort of sat up and take notice of the process and how it works in their state and what they can do to either make it more difficult or change the process so there's less opportunities for ballot measures of a certain kind. So it's become kind of just the processes behind these initiatives have become something that state legislators are really taking a look at. So one thing to watch out for are supermajority requirements. South Dakota, Arkansas, North Dakota, and possibly other states, including Florida, will probably see ballot measures to increase the vote threshold you would need to pass a future ballot measure, especially either a constitutional amendment or in South Dakota, it's any sort of tax increase or measure that appropriates a certain amount of money would require a 60% threshold instead of 50, instead of a simple majority. So that's kind of an interesting little change to the process behind the ballot measures that actually has to go through the ballot measure process itself, because most of these provisions are in state constitutions. So to change them, the legislature has to ask voters to approve the change. So kind of an interesting little meta trend going on there with ballot measures about ballot measures.
How fascinating. And I heard that Texas just also did that, where they changed their constitution to affirm that they'll never have a state income tax, and that it would take 2/3 of a vote to overturn that. So
right. So that's, it's an interesting, this idea of putting the status quo into the state constitution is something you'll see happen a lot, especially if a certain party has a pretty strong control, but maybe they see that their majority might drop slightly, or they just want to ensconce a certain policy. What they'll do is put a policy into the Constitution. So that measure didn't change the fact that Texas doesn't have an income tax, but it makes it more difficult for a future legislature to enact an income tax. Just like you said, they would need that 2/3 requirement, and then they would need voter approval as well because it's in the Constitution.
Right. Fascinating. So I'll be watching out for that. Thanks for giving us that broad level overview. Now, what do you think this year is going to look like as far as partisan control? I know that you're kind of in the nonpartisan ballot measures world, but being part of the bigger Ballotpedia, everything else is partisan, right? It's Republican versus Democrat for the most part. Do you think this will be a good year for Republicans? What's kind of your thought with Biden's approval rating, and where are you kind of seeing these races shift? Do you have a lot of uncontested races? I mean, things like that are good indicators, I believe, of whether this cycle will favor a certain party. And I'm starting to see some of those tea leaves. What are you seeing?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I have my nose pretty buried in the nonpartisan world of ballot measures. Well, it's partisan. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's about policy. So there are people at Ballotpedia who could give such a better answer than I. They really have their eye on that data. I think conventional wisdom says that the midterm is an opportunity for the party that doesn't hold the presidency. I think that's certainly there, and I imagine that that opportunity would be pretty strong this midterm. I think that's what a lot of the data says, is that Republicans will have an opportunity, but I mean it really comes down to the voters' decisions on election day, and I don't have a lot of that data at my fingertips, just because like I said, I have my nose buried in ballot measures. But I can get you talking to someone on our elections team, and they'll they'll talk to you for an hour and a half about what they expect to see. But yeah, as far as uncontested races go, I know we publish a report every year kind of forecasting that, but I don't have those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay, I'd love to see those if available.
I can send you a link.
Okay, thank you so much. And then I also wanted to ask you, one of my heroes, who I interviewed at Altic, Scott Rasmussen, is one of your contributors. So what is that connection between Ballotpedia and Scott?
Yeah, Scott's always been a great supporter of Ballotpedia, and he actually writes a column that we publish. It's his column, and his name is on it, but we publish it and send it around, called the number of the day, where he just highlights an interesting, usually it's a result of one of his polling numbers, and sort of highlights it and writes a nice article, getting at why that number is interesting and why he selected it as his number of the day. But yeah, besides that, like I said, he's always been a supporter. He's always been kind of someone who's helped us out if we ever had a question for him. I know that I've talked to him before, and I've seen him at various meetings, and he values Ballotpedia's mission. And so while he has sort of his lane and we have our lane, and he likes to express his opinions, and we try to keep our noses out of opinion explanations, we certainly value each other's missions, and I think his support has been great.
That's wonderful. Now, wanted to ask you a big picture, especially back to kind of the ballot measures and the things you've been doing there. When we won, the no side won on Proposition 16 in California, statewide ballot measure, we won 57-43, basically on the conservative side, in the same electorate that voted for Joe Biden by 29 points.
Yeah.
So that was a huge kind of like disparity between the presidential result and the ballot measure result. Do you see that frequently? And also, we were outspent 17-1, probably even more when it's all said and done, more like 20-1. Since you have access to a lot of the data when it comes to monies that are pumped into these nonpartisan measures, what's kind of your assessment of the ROI of the, financial investments? In this case, they spent way more money to lose, but maybe that's messaging, or, that we have our ideas why that happened. But I'm curious to hear on your end, when everyone talks about money and politics, and I'm starting to see there's different, there's different outcomes and that's not directly correlated to money to votes, basically. What do you see in the world of ballot measures is the impact of money?
Yeah, so it's certainly there. The impact of, the impact of money is ever present, and for ballot measures, especially because with many of the Supreme Court rulings that sort of prevent there from being any limits on the amount of money that can be spent and contributed by various stakeholders, that a huge amount of money does go into ballot measures.
Yes.
It wouldn't happen unless there was an effect. So if you look at one of the most expensive measures ever, for example, in California, Proposition 22, which was also on the ballot the same year as Prop 16,
the Uber Lyft
one, right? So that measure, it was approved handily, but it was the amount of money behind it. You're talking about $205 million. That had to play a role. If that money hadn't been there, you'd have to think that the $18 million on the other side could have had a big effect. But really, I think what it comes down to is that there are certain issues where it doesn't really matter how much you spend on them. Like for example, something like minimum wage, or even the Medicaid expansion measures that are happening now. But take minimum wage as a more tried and true example. If you put minimum wage on the ballot, it's so likely to pass, even in some of the more conservative states, that spending money against it is not usually something a lot of people do if they're smart. So there are certain issues where voters just like them. and so you can only take it so far with the money, but you can still, that money still has that effect. So if it's a race where, there's going to be a 5 to 10 point margin, then having that money can really sway it one way or the other.
Mm.
But if it sometimes the writing's just on the wall, whether it's the timing or like you said, the messaging that's found by one side or the other, it's just it's difficult uh, to sort of predict exactly how it's going to affect, how much money you need to get the right message across. So anyway, I would say huge factor. Money is a huge factor. It's not the only controlling factor when it comes to measures, because no matter how much lipstick you put on a pig, it's still a pig. So and if it's possible, voters will see through something and will see the policy itself, and will often make the decision they want to make regardless of how much money is spent.
Now you've seen this through multiple cycles, Josh, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen money become less of an impact? Because I've certainly seen that locally, where in the past, I think money was an even bigger factor, but I think now with social media and a lot of other dynamics that have come into the mix, it's caused other factors to maybe even become more, impactful than financial investments. Have you seen that the way I have? Or maybe that's just a California thing.
No, I that's an interesting point. I don't have any data to really back it up. I will say what we've seen is that campaigns have gotten more expensive. So people are spending more and more. And maybe that's so one of the data points we track every year in our campaign finance analysis is the cost per vote. So we look at
Yes,
which campaigns spent the most to get a certain number of votes, and why is that, and how expensive was it to get this yes vote, and sometimes
right.
you see campaigns spending tens if not hundreds of dollars to get a vote. So I think one data point that might speak to what you're pointing at is just, campaigns seem to be more expensive. So
Yes.
to get out there and motivate voters in sort of the traditional money bound ways is getting more expensive. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of opportunity for creative campaigning right now. And sometimes if you get something to go viral, that can, it might be a cheap thing, but if it goes viral, it will have a way larger impact than spending millions of dollars on ads that no one cares about. So certainly.
And then sometimes you have a partisan lean that's just too strong. I think there's like Kim Klacik was that candidate that went viral and got lots of attention last cycle, but ultimately she wouldn't win that Maryland congressional seat. It was just not, like, basically impossible.
Yeah.
No matter how much money was pumped in, right? So I think that's so that's great. Well, thanks for all you guys are doing. Is there anything else you want our viewers to highlight to our viewers, as far as and on my write-up to highlight as far as going to Ballotpedia? Are there any new features we should be looking at? Floor is yours.
Yeah, I would say, just sort of inspired by your last point, one of the things we're trying to do is get readers involved. So we have a candidate connection survey that we really like, where we invite candidates to kind of open up and present their positions and to get introduce themselves to their voters in a little bit of a more personal way. And we're really trying to spread that around. And one of the ways we're going to expand our scope is by getting our readers more involved in having their candidates submit their survey, and having their candidates make sure that their presence is on Ballotpedia, and even submitting data to us. So we're always looking for volunteers to help us out. We're always looking for engagement and kind of a back and forth with our readers, as opposed to just sending them information. So if you like what we do and want to get involved, we're constantly looking for that kind of engagement. So
wonderful. So I know quite a few candidates that, I'm supporting and that I like, especially for some of our assembly races here locally. Do they just go on the website and just fill out the form? How does that, is there a link?
Yeah, so I'll email you a link. We are setting up right now a way to kind of easily pressure your candidate into submitting their survey.
I love it.
So let me get you that. But yeah, if you go, I should be more familiar with this. But if you go onto Ballotpedia and just search for candidate connection survey, or even just survey. In fact, you can probably do a Google search for Ballotpedia and the word survey, and our candidate connection field will come up. And then you can submit it right there online. It's just a certain number of fields you fill out, and you can, of course, give as much or as little information as you want. We have some key questions that we think through feedback that our readers really want to hear about. But yeah, just send that link to everyone. We want to get as much content straight from candidates as we can to sort of balance the amount of content we can gather ourselves. So
Yeah.
opening up that connection between readers and the back and forth is something we're really looking forward to expanding.
So if a candidate were to join or to sign up, what kind of information would be published? Is it biographical information, a video, a campaign video? What's the advantage of doing that versus them just not even engaging?
Sure. So just one of the biggest advantages is making sure to get your basic information out there. You need some name recognition, right? So if you don't have a profile on Ballotpedia, this will guarantee that you get one. So that's one thing. But the other thing is it opens up several opportunities to answer specific questions that we know readers want to know, but also to put a little bit of a personal touch on your profile. So we have questions, something like, just who are you? Tell us about yourself.